you'll have to battle for the back pew, right? Good to see everybody, and looks like everybody is probably familiar on some level. If you haven't met Brother Jim Harris, I'm sure afterwards you'll have plenty of time. Let's try to keep all the questions, everything, till the end, and let him just roll with his presentation. And
Jim, I'm wrestling for his shirt.
I'm going to leave that up to you two. Just let me get my phone and I'll record it. But we're going to open with a word of prayer, and then I'm just going to let him come up, introduce himself, and just go. Okay? Let's pray. Father God, we thank you so much for your love for us, for your grace that you extend to us. Lord, I just ask that tonight that you would open our hearts, open our minds, and our understanding. We might comprehend something completely new and different that we've never seen before concerning our country, concerning the direction of our country, our faith. Lord, open us up to some new and exciting change. But we feel the winds of change blowing, and a lot of times we don't like the direction that it's going. But either way, Lord, turn us back to you. Turn our hearts back to you. Turn our nation back to you. And Lord, we will just praise you, and we will love you in it. And Lord, we know that you love us in Christ. So it's in His name that we pray.
Well, good evening. How's everybody?
Good.
All right. I need to get everybody's name, so on the count of three, everybody just say your first name loud if you can. 1, 2, 3. I didn't get your friend. Thank you for the invitation to be back up here at Oak Park. I appreciate it very much. I'm Jim Harris. I'm pastor of the Riverview Heights Baptist Church, and once you have been there, June will be 25 years. And I had these two in the back. This was in our youth group. It was last century, wasn't it?
Yes, sir.
Last century. And I think I had seen in school back also last century. And great young couple. I appreciate them tremendously. What we're going to do tonight, we'll walk you through just a very small microscopic portion of some of our country's history. We have two documents that have established the legal atmosphere of our country. That's the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. So when you establish a business, you have bylaws and articles of incorporation. And your bylaws can never violate your articles of incorporation. That's illegal. So what the bylaws, the articles of incorporation, they will say, this is what we are. This is what we're selling. This is what our service policies are. This is who we are. Now your bylaws say, now here's what we're going to do, what we are. This is how we're going to hire. This is how we're going to establish our research and development. Well, in a national sense, the Declaration of Independence is our articles of incorporation. This is who we are. We're no longer part of you. We have been a part of you for a long time, but now we're establishing our own country. Then comes the Constitution, and the Constitution, basically, these are our bylaws that tell not only us as American citizens, but the rest of the world, here's how we're going to do this. It was unique in the history of the world. This was, in 1787, this was radical stuff. Now today, it's over 200 years old. Matter of fact, it's so old, we're abandoning these things. That's how old it is. We think they are way too old to be effective anymore. But what we're going to do is walk through. There are 28 basic principles in the Constitution. And when we wrote the Declaration of Independence, I have often heard, the main reason America was founded was because of taxation without representation. You ever heard that? I've heard that forever. And so people will tell you we had an economic founding. That's why America was founded, because we didn't want to pay. That was number 17 out of 27 grievances that we had against King James. So it looks like that probably was not the most important issue. There were much more important issues at stake there. But let's take a look at an evening with the founders here and get going as quickly as possible. Our founding fathers were not just statesmen. They weren't just politics that stand in front and make speeches. They were much, much more than that. They were intellectuals. And I would dare you to find a deep intellectual in high government today. It is very rare to find a thinker in the politics these days. But these men knew the importance of their ideas, and they also knew how to communicate these ideas to the American people. And their writings and their speeches, of course, they didn't have Twitter, we didn't have Facebook in those days, so they wrote. And their writings and their speeches best defined this new nation. We had a foundation of Christian principles. Don't let anybody ever tell you this is not that this was a nation not founded on Christian principles. It is. They just don't know their history. And we're going to look at some of that tonight. But these men, not only did they establish a republic, which we're not a democracy, we are a republic. There's a huge difference between those two things. We are a representative republic. And now the difference is a democracy. Let's say this was the whole nation. If we were a democracy, everybody in here would have a vote on everything we did as a nation. That's a democracy. But let's say we begin to grow and you move to Oklahoma and you move to California. You're not going to come here to vote on every law. And so what they did, they established this representative form of government. Well, let's elect representatives to represent us, and we'll let them meet. So that's what we have, that form of government. So much of what these founders, and there were about 250 founders, not just those that met in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787. There were about 250 that had significant influence on the establishment of the nation through what they wrote, basically. Many of them were preachers. And so when I run across preachers that say, I don't want to get involved in that, I'm saying, why? You're abandoning your obligation as a spiritual leader if you don't get involved in these things. But anyway, what they said and wrote gave rise to the laws that we live by even today in 2016. Now, the United States was born or given birth on March the 1st, 1781 at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. Our first Constitution was the Articles of Confederation. I'm sure you've heard of the old Articles of Confederation. They were weak. They were so weak they were called a League of Friendship. Of course, we didn't have a United States. We had colonies. And these colonies were basically independent countries. They had their own currency. They had their own everything, trade agreements with Europe. And so these Articles of Confederation were so loosely structured that they asked the colonies to send money to the capital. Would you mind sending a little money? Well, it's different today. There is no request from the IRS to do that. And John Hanson was actually the first president, not of the United States, but of the Continental Congress, which basically was the president of the country. And so he was the first one. His family, by the way, very deeply patriotic family. The Hanson family were a well-known group of people in the day. And this League of Friendship, these things were in place from 1781 to 1789. Again, they were just loose. And if the country was ever to grow, and if the country was ever to have a solid front dealing with Europe, some things were going to have to change. They were going to have to tighten up the Articles of Confederation, which is what they originally attempted to do. But I don't have the handout to give you. The original states, except Rhode Island didn't participate in this, they appointed 70 men, what was referred to as the Federal Convention, in the State House in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, for the specific purpose of repairing the Articles of Confederation. No one was even thinking new Constitution. That was not even on the table when they met. It began on May the 14th, 1787, when delegates from only 2 states showed up. There was not even enough to have a quorum, so here's what they did. And I'll get to that in just a moment. But our first 8 presidents, John Hanson was elected, and you were elected 1 term for 1 year. That's it. Next year, somebody else was elected as president of the Continental Congress, which again, in effect, was president of the country. Then there was Elias Boudinot, 82 to 83, Thomas Mifflin, 83 to 84, Richard Henry Lee, 84, 85, John Hancock, Nathan Gorman, Arthur St. Clair, Cyrus Griffin, and, oh yeah, there was this George Washington guy that finally got in. And well, you say, well, why do we say he was the first president? He was the first constitutionally elected president of the United States, or the first popularly elected president. And so a lot of people are like, what? Washington wasn't the first president? Legally, no. But technically, I suppose you could say he was. Now, we've got 2 states that showed up. They dismissed every day because there wasn't enough to even have a quorum. And so they adjourned from day to day until May the 25th, 1787, just a little over a week later. Finally, 7 states got together, and they began to debate the old Articles of Confederation. And as they debated these issues, something became very obvious to those that were there. And what that was is this. We just need to throw these things in a garbage can. They're not going to work if we are going to build a nation like we envision. And so that's what began to happen. By mid-June, a new document started to be framed. 55 delegates attended the Constitutional Convention. 39 of them eventually signed the document, and 3 attendees refused to sign. And I'm going to give you their names in a minute. Don't look at them. Don't beat them up too bad, because keep in mind, what we were looking at here was forming a stronger central government. And where did we come from? England. Did they have a strong central government over there? Is that kind of why we got on the boat and came over here? So try to escape that. And so I don't beat these guys up very hard, but here they are. Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts, George Mason, and Edmund Jennings Randolph of Virginia thought they were putting a little too much muscle into this idea of a central form of government, and they didn't want to repeat England, and so they refused to sign it. And so the delegates ranged in age from Jonathan Dayton, who was 26 years old, to Dr. Benjamin Franklin, who was 81 years old. Now, could you imagine putting millennials in charge of writing a new constitution today? I think I'd just go fishing. It would just not be a good turnout. May the 24th to September the 18th, 1787, the greatest document of human government ever written came out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I do not believe the Constitution is inspired. It's my contention that only the Bible is inspired. But this is a God-influenced document. And I say that with no hesitation whatsoever. This thing is genius, ladies and gentlemen. What we have in the form of a constitution is absolutely incredible. Now, here's the thing. It was written in 1787. Where did they get these ideas? They didn't make this stuff up in Philadelphia. These ideas had been in existence for centuries. I mean, centuries. But they were so radical, no nation had ever said, oh, let's do that. Nobody would touch it because Europe was the center of the world. And guess how Europe had always been governed? By monarchies and kings and queens and, the aristocracy. And so these ideas, that was toxic. You didn't even mention these things. Well, we've got a new nation, new start, new people. So they started to incorporate some of these things into this document. 2 Corinthians 3:17 says, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. I want you to understand this. Wherever the Bible is embraced as a form of cultural change, there there is a deeper level of freedom among that culture than anywhere else in the world. The strip of land on the earth is called the 1040 window. If you look on a map, go to the 40 degree parallel north to the 10 degree south. There's a strip of land that covers basically the Middle East and Africa. In that strip of land, there are hundreds of millions of people. It is the poorest population on earth. It is where most of the false religions in the world have come from. These people live on an average of $1.11 per day. They basically, in wholesale numbers, have rejected the Bible. And when you reject the Bible, you get what you have in the 1040 window. You get poverty, you get disease, you get all of those things. But the creation of the United States was, quote, the greatest single effort of national deliberation that the world has ever seen. John Adams said that. 124 days. That's how long the Constitutional Convention was. And this nation didn't receive its birth without pain. The Constitutional Convention got hairy. As a matter of fact, they dismissed it for several days because there was so much argumentation, so much disagreement. They dismissed, and you know what they did? They went to local churches and attended service in local churches. And when they got back together, it was Dr. Benjamin Franklin who said, you know, guys, we need to start every morning with prayer. And he was the one that did that, made that suggestion, and they did. And so there were some that wanted 3 presidents, 1 for each branch of government. There were some that wanted 7 presidents. And so, I mean, it was just, well, I want this, I want that. And so it was quite the scene for a while. Now, it took the colonists 180 years. From 1607. Anybody know what happened in 1607? Jamestown. So from the founding of Jamestown to 1787, which was the Constitutional Convention, that's 180 years. The colonists had no central government. They had local governments, they had village governments, but there was no national government. And so for 180 years, they were collecting these ideas. One day we need to have a government, and so they started collecting these ideas. And they searched really well. These were farmers and butchers and bakers and candlestick makers. I'm aware of that. These were not what you would call, your professional peoples today, but they did their research very well because the United States is the oldest constitutional republic in the history of the world. Did you know that? We are by far the oldest. Now, let me show you some ridiculous statistics. The Dominican Republic holds a world record currently with 32 constitutions. They'll get a new leader, he'll come in. What's the first thing they do when they have a coup? Throw the Constitution out, write another one. They've done that 32 times. Venezuela, who, by the way, are y'all keeping up what's going on in Venezuela right now? And that's what people in this country are all enamored. Let's go to socialism. Okay. They're eating dogs and pigeons in Venezuela right now because there's not enough food to go around. Anyway, they've got 26. Haiti, 24. Ecuador, 20. El Salvador, 14. Nicaragua, 14. Honduras, 14. Colombia, 6 to 10, depending on whose book you read. And so they can't seem to find solid ground to build a nation on. And here we are, United States, we've had one constitution. It's in Washington. I've seen it. It's starting to fade. It's getting kind of, that's pretty symbolic too. Not only is it fading physically, but the principles are becoming outdated in the minds of most of our politicians, and they're looking for new ways to govern. Don't be surprised at that, by the way. If you have read, and I'm sure you have, the book of the Revelation, you know what's coming. A one world centralized government is coming. A one world church is coming. A one world economy is coming. You realize that's not going to just happen overnight. That's going to happen over a period of a long time. We're in that period right now. We're starting to see, we're going to go off the gold standard. The dollar is losing ground just tremendously in world markets, and so it's on the way. The University of Houston political science professors gathered 15,000 quotes, and they narrowed this list to 3,154 quotes that had a significant impact on the development of the United States. Now, I find this very interesting. This project took them 10 years to complete. And the three men that they found most quoted by the founders were Blackstone, Montesquieu, and John Locke. And I'm sure you've heard of all of these gentlemen. The Bible was quoted 4 times more often than Montesquieu. It was quoted 12 times more often than the great legal expert Blackstone, 16 times more often than John Locke. 34% of all of the quotes of the 3,154 were direct quotes from the Bible. That's 1/3, over 1/3. An additional 60% of these quotes were for men using the Bible to arrive at their conclusions. Now, these were quotes that were significant in the founding of the country. So now let me ask you the obvious question. Did the Bible have a significant influence on the development of the Constitution of the United States? Yes. I mean, you're saying, Lincoln didn't get killed in Washington. Yes, he did. You can't deny that, and you can't deny this either. All right? The purpose of the Constitution, it was written to perpetuate a Christian order of government. You're aware that our Constitution would not work in Iran or Iraq or Saudi Arabia because they don't believe in individual freedoms. The only place this type of government will work is among a culture of people who believe that God gave individual rights to individual people. Now, if you don't believe that, you've got a problem with the Constitution. That's why a lot of the radical leftists and the progressives do not like the idea of our Constitution because it takes power away from them. They want to control what you do. They want to tell you what to drink and what to drive and what kind of light bulbs to use. And right now in Venezuela, they're rationing toilet paper. And it's crazy. They're telling you every little thing you can and cannot do. And so it was written to perpetuate a Christian order of government. Now, from 1776 to 1976, America made greater strides in technology than in the previous 5,000 years of the history of man. It's amazing to me to see what has been developed in the United States in the last 500 years. Well, freedom that was guaranteed by written document unleashed a flood of growth. You know what really our government needs to do? Get out of your way. It slows you down. It slows businesses down. It slows growth down. It's an anchor. And that's the purpose of it, is to slow down the freedoms and the liberties of the individual so that those freedoms and liberties can be given to the government. That's the ultimate goal of socialism and communism, is for the means of manufacture and delivery and all of those powers be given to the government and taken away from you. And what happened in the country from 1776 to 1976, there was an explosion of advancements like mankind had never seen before. Here are some examples. In nuclear energy, jet travel, freedom of worship, business, science, communication. Where did the great advancements in these sciences take place? Here. Why? Was it because our mountains were any higher? Or was our water any cleaner? Was our grass any greener? Why? We have more freedom. Europe could have had this same impact on the world centuries before us. How could they have done that? Get out of the way. If the kings had just gotten out of the way and let the people do what they were gifted by God to do, they would have been in the United States. But they didn't choose to do that, and the Lord blessed us with that opportunity. Now, not very many colonists wanted to hear about this self-government idea, and as I was studying this, I found this an intriguing thing. Why wouldn't you want to govern yourself? Well, here's what they discovered. They didn't think they were virtuous enough to govern themselves. Now, do we even think like this today? You know, it takes a lot of strength to govern yourself. It takes a lot of character to set limits on your own behavior. It takes a lot of integrity to build a fence around what you do and what you don't do. Look at kids. Kids don't do that naturally. You have to do that. You have to say, no, you can't do that. You can do this. Well, you know, if you can imagine a culture thinking like that, we're not virtuous enough. Well, if you push anything into a corner long enough, you're going to get an adverse reaction. And that's exactly what England got in just a little bit. Well, Europe's crowned heads, very interested in what was going on over here in the United States. They heard about this freedom, this individual, give the little man freedom to be and do his own stuff. Well, you know, and these old monarchical families in England and France and the old states over there were watching us on the edge of their thrones. You know what they were waiting for? They were waiting for us to go down the toilet. There's no way you put rednecks in charge of the country and it worked well. And that's exactly what we were proposing to do. Well, here's how bad this thing worked. By 1905, we were the richest industrial nation in the world. And England and Europe and France, they were kind of like, how did that, you know, they were just stunned by the development over here. We had 5% of the Earth's land area. 5%. We had 6% of the Earth's population. And with those small numbers, here's what we did. We produced almost 50% of everything that was made on the Earth, on the whole planet. And Europe was just blown away. And so people started hearing, hey, over there, you're free. You can build a business. You can make your own money and keep it. You can buy land and keep it. Guess what happened? People started coming over here. And that's how the country was populated, basically. Well, our founders discovered that the golden key to prosperity is not government control. It's freedom. Get out of the way. Let people do the thing they're gifted and passionate to do. You know, you do one thing better than you do anything else. God has given you a gift to do something. Now, I know people that are gifted in the medical field. We've got some nurses in our church, and I hear them talking about, you know, we cut this guy open and we pulled his liver, and I'm just like, really? And they just love it. They get it and they talk about it, and that's a gift. You know, God, I'm glad that my doctor, you know, when I've had the few surgeries, he didn't go, oh, no, I can't. You know, I'm glad he just jumped right in there. That was his gift. And there are people that are gifted to do everything. You got a pastor gifted to preach and to speak. Not everybody has that gift. But you don't have to be a pastor to be in God's will, by the way. You can be a florist, a mechanic, an insurance agent. You understand that we all have needs in these areas. Maybe the Lord will lead you to open a grocery store or a clothing store. Those are needs that need to be met. And so they understood that you follow your passion. Now, here's where we need to get down to what we're talking about tonight. Where did they get this stuff, these ideas? Well, there were two brothers, Hengist and Horsa, that brought their people who were called the Anglo-Saxons. They brought them into the British Isles. Now check the date, 450 A.D. All right, that's about 450 years after Christ was born. These guys brought their peoples over, and they introduced to the British Isles an unwritten code called People's Law into the British Isles. And it was also called Anglo-Saxon law. They didn't write it down for a long time. Now, later on, that would turn into a weakness, and so they did finally write it down. But there were some unwritten laws that, and the reason they didn't write this stuff down was because they figured, my word, everyone's got enough sense not to do this. Don't kill. Why should you write that down? Don't steal. Why do you need to write that down? Don't you have enough common sense not to kill anybody or to steal their stuff? And so that was the angle that they came at. Now, the founders knew that men wanted three basic things. Number one, freedom. I don't want the government being my caretaker. Number two, prosperity. Nothing wrong with profit. Socialists and progressives look at profit as evil. And if you profit, that means you stole that from somebody. You stole it from your neighbor. You're corrupt, and that's the idea. Nobody can make money legitimately. Well, yes, you can. You most certainly can. And then peace. Those were the three things. And so there was no such form of government anywhere in the world that guaranteed this stuff in writing. You realize that the kings, when they went to bed at night, if they had a late night pizza and they got up the next morning not feeling real well, you realize they could just cut your head off because they didn't feel good. Well, that's not in the law. There was no law. There was nothing written. Why would you write anything down? Because if you write something down, you're more or less held to that. These guys here in our country, they wrote this stuff down. They guaranteed certain freedoms and liberties. And again, Europe was like, what is the matter with you people? You can't do that. Well, they did, and it worked out very well. Now, here were the 6 guiding principles of this unwritten code, People's Law. Now, 450 A.D. Number 1, they were considered a commonwealth of free men. Read Leviticus 25, verse number 10. They were organized into small manageable units with representatives that had a voice and a vote, Exodus 18. They strongly emphasized local self-government. And if you have a problem, what you did, let's say, what's your first name, sir?
Alan.
Alan. Let's say I have a problem with Alan. Now, according to People's Law, which was based on the Bible, what is my step? I have a problem with Alan, so what do? I go to Jess, right? I complain and gripe and get on Facebook and throw him under the bus. What do? I go to him. All right. Now, if I have a problem with Alan and Jess, where do I go? To Alan and Jess. So you handle it locally first. If that doesn't work, what does Matthew 18 say? Then you take 2 or 3 with you. You expand the circle of accountability until ultimately you get to the church. And so if that doesn't work, then there were other steps that were to be taken, but it strongly emphasized local self-government. The law is based primarily on reparations to victims, not the guy that pulled the crime off, but to the one that he committed the crime against. Number 5, the elected leaders and the laws were approved by consent of the people. If the people didn't agree to it, it was not put into practice. And then number 6, the accused were presumed innocent until proven guilty. Does that sound familiar? 450 A.D. This is pretty advanced for 450 A.D. And this is what People's Law was based on. And our founders read People's Law. They were like, kind of like that. I think that's pretty wise right there. So they started stitching these ideas into what will later become the Constitution. Now, the world was about to change because the Articles of Confederation were only 6 years old in 1787. They were established in 1781. And so they really didn't have an opportunity to stay in existence for very long because it was just a bad document. James Madison is the guy that suggested a stronger central government. So you can imagine not everybody liked James Madison. And they didn't like his idea of a strong central government because, again, where did we come from? A really strong central government in England, and they didn't like that. So for over 5,000 years, we had attempted to build all kind of permanent civilizations. They all failed. The Incas, the Mayas, the Aztecs, the Minoans. Where are they today in our history books? We read about them because they built their nations and their empires based on One person. That was the king. Everybody lived to serve the king. Well, after a while, the novelty of that wears off, and people want freedom, and they didn't give it to them. And so the whole thing collapsed. But something very different happened in 1607. Jamestown, Virginia was the first permanent colony on the North American continent. And all eyes, specifically in Europe, were on this little bitty jerkwater town in Virginia. Now, out of this settlement, in Jamestown, there were some relatively famous descendants. Now, has anybody famous come out of Fort Meade? Andrew McCutcheon, is that his name? Pittsburgh Pirates. Right. He played here at Fort Meade High School, right? I think it's pretty. And usually, we're so proud of them, we put signs up. Fort Meade, the home of whoever. Right? And so, Mulberry's got one. The guy that invented the modern computer, came from Mulberry High School. And so people are very proud, but it's a pretty small, it's not like there are 50 names. Not very many. But some of the greatest minds that this nation or any other nation has ever known, Thomas Jefferson, all he did was author the Declaration of Independence. His ancestors were in Jamestown. How about James Madison, the father of the Constitution? George Washington, the first president. George Mason was the author of the first American Bill of Rights. All of these people were descendants of the families in Jamestown. Now, what was the key? What was a real important foundational aspect of Jamestown, Virginia? Freedom. These people were free. And so I'm telling you, it affects the genetics of people when children are raised in an atmosphere of freedom and liberty versus authoritarianism. It really makes a difference in their future. Now, King James had oppressed us to the point where the colonists were like, okay, we're sick of this. We've got British troops in our homes. They're confiscating every dime we make. And his foot is on our neck continuously. And so this is what was going on. And they finally said, all right, maybe we are virtuous. We may not be virtuous to the point that we want to be, but we're better than that. And so in the summer of 1786, 10 years after the announcement of the Declaration of Independence, 3 years after the end of the American Revolution, which lasted from April the 19th, 1775, to September the 3rd, 1783, that was 8 years, 137 days. We lost 25,000 Americans. That's 11 a day died during that war. At the end of that period, folks, we were broke. That broke us. And we had to support these men. We had to buy arms, and it was just a tremendous financial drain. Each state was independent of the other. The Articles of Confederation worked relatively well as long as you wanted to leave your colonies as independent countries of their own. It was okay. That's really not what was wanted here. And so Congress instructed each of the states to write a constitution of its own. So there were state constitutions that were to be written. And John Adams, who led the way, wrote a constitution for the state of Massachusetts that featured a balance between three branches of government. It wasn't his idea. He didn't come up with this. He incorporated it into the Constitution of Massachusetts. There was a legislative, the judicial, and he had the legislature divided into two houses. Does that sound familiar? Again, this all began in Massachusetts, and it was the model that ultimately would find its way into the federal Constitution of 1787. And so these ideas were starting to perk and boil and come together. And the founders knew that freedom thrives in a very particular atmosphere. I'm not a gardener, but are orchids really hard to grow? I mean, are they real finicky about what they like and too much light or not enough, whatever? Freedom is like that. Freedom is very particular about where it can grow. And it can only grow in a particular kind of environment. They are fundamental elements of human exceptionalism. The United States is an exceptional country. And it's not because we're any different genetically than anybody else, because most of us are of European descent. But we are exceptional because we have been given historically permission, freedom, and encouragement to follow the path that God has designed for your life. And when you do that, you get geniuses. You get people that invent great things, like has happened here in the country. The government cannot provide happiness. It cannot exercise authority over people. The government has not, constitutionally, been empowered to grant entitlements to remove work requirements, as we have done for welfare. Now, that's not a constitutional provision. Well, then where are these things coming from? People are doing what is politically expedient to keep themselves in power, to keep their chairmanships, to keep their money. You know, all these people go to Congress, broke. 15 years later, they leave with $50 million in the bank. All right? Now, something is awry there. And so, Mr. Adam Smith, who was a Scottish professor, published a 5-volume set of books called The Wealth of Nations. You ever heard of The Wealth of Nations? Great set of books. Our whole economy is based on these books right here. And here's what Adam Smith said in his Wealth of Nations. See if any of this rings a bell. Number one, he believed in specialized production. In other words, each person or corporation of persons do what they do best. Are you a farrier? You know, you horseshoe. Can you do that really well? Then do that. Get you a couple of guys. Go into business. I mean, we need blacksmiths, back in that day. And so specialized production. Exchange of goods takes place in a free market environment without government intervention in price, wages, or production. You realize that the government does not produce a product or a service. And when it begins to compete with its tax base, it's in a lot of trouble. Right now, our government is competing with the insurance industry. And it will eventually drive private insurance businesses out of business. And it's foolish for the government to compete against us. We're the tax base, for goodness sake. Anyway, he said that this should take place in a free market environment without the government saying, well, we'll give you subsidies if you'll grow this or not grow that. All right. Then number 3, the free market provides the needs of people on the basis of supply and demand without government-imposed monopolies. Every time the government gets involved in a business, guess what happens? They go broke. It's belly up. Solyndra is just one of the many, many, many examples. The government can't do anything really well. The one thing that it does relatively well is the military. And it used to do it better than it's doing it now. How many of you served in the service? Thank you for your service. I would dare say that you would find it much different today than you did back in the day when you guys were serving. Anyway, then number 4, the prices were regulated by competition on the basis of supply and demand. Let's say that Alan and Jess make a widget, and he's got a really good widget, and he's got a really cheap widget. Should he go to the government and say, look, I'm running out of money, I'm going broke, how about subsidizing me to $100,000 so I can keep up with it? Is really what should happen here? Yeah, should he either go out of business or step up and start making a better widget so he can compete a little better? Now, the market will tell you if your product's any good or not. If it's no good, you're going to go out of business. If it's good, you're going to thrive. And so this competition is great for business. If a business knows the only thing between me and the poorhouse is me, that's going to make a big difference in the motivation of the business owner. Then number 5, profits are looked upon as the means by which production of goods and services is made worthwhile. Of course, you're aware right now that income earners in the country are looked down on. The rich they're not paying their fair share. Well, my word, they're paying 47% of all income tax. They're paying more than their fair share. Now, are there thieves among the uber rich? I'm sure there are. But are they all thieves? No. Are there people who are incredibly wealthy that got that way because they're just simply hard workers? Absolutely. Leave them alone. You don't owe me a dime. You know, if you have that kind of capacity to earn, God bless you, a tithe off of it, right? Now, number 6, competition is looked upon as the means by which quality is improved, quantity is increased, prices are reduced. Let me give you a perfect example of how businesses can evolve to stay in business. Back during World War II, there was a company that made munitions. They made bullets and bombs and mines and stuff, and they were called the Zero Bomb Company. Well, the war is over. They've got a manufacturing plant that, what are they going to do with it now? They don't need bombs anymore. So the Zero Bomb Company changed its tack, and they started building fishing equipment. And they called themselves Zebco. Zebco is the Zero Bomb Company reinvented. And I'm telling you, they've made more money since they've been making fishing gear than they ever did. And so they were just smart. They reinvented themselves. And so competition, no government should ever attempt to provide a service or product in competition with its taxpayers. Folks, when this happens, that government is moving towards socialism. When the government is beginning to eye private industry as its competition, I'm telling you, you're starting to see the development of a socialistic form of government. All right. It was being practiced nowhere. Isn't that amazing? Does that stuff make sense to you? It makes perfect sense to me. Those 6 things that Adam Smith said, hey, this will build an economy. And I'm telling you, if we went back to those 6 things, we could solve our financial problems in 5 years in this country. If we would just use some simple principles that are time-honored and that have always worked. Well, from May the 17th to September the 18th in Philadelphia in 1787, a very unique and an incredible document was being formulated because you were the heart of the Constitution, not the king, not the government. You. Can you believe this was unusual? This should have been the way every government always functioned, but wasn't that at all. Now, this is probably the most important thing that I want to leave with you. The next few minutes. What is government? We got to have government, right? Government is nothing more than a system of ruling or controlling. Now, how are you going to do that? That is the key question here. The founders measured political systems in terms of coercive power and systematic control which a particular system of government exercised over people. In other words, we can have armies to force you to do things. You know, there were several ways that these things could be done. The yardstick was not political parties. It wasn't the Whigs or the Democrats or the Republicans or anything like that. The yardstick was political power. How much pressure does it take to get people to move? Well, the founders considered 2 extremes. They looked at these and they said there's got to be a third option. And here was option number 1, anarchy. Let's don't do anything. No law. Let's just let people be a law unto themselves. Well, we can see how that worked out in the book of Joshua. Joshua 21:25. After 350 years of dark ages in the book of Joshua, the final tap out of the book of Joshua, every man did that which was right in his own eyes. You cannot have no law. You can't. That's called anarchy. Then number 2, there was tyranny. That's too much law. Can you have too much law? Absolutely. Can you have too little law? Absolutely. Now, are these our only choices? And the founders were really looking. This is not. We're not going to settle for either one of these 2. And so here's where people's law comes into play here. You've got ruler's law on the left side, which was tyranny. The ruler just simply told everybody what to do. Then in the middle, there was people's law. And then on the right, there was no law, anarchy. Now, this was the scale of law. And I'm going to illustrate this with a pyramid. Under ruler's law or tyranny, the base of the pyramid is at the top because all the power gravitated to the ruler. Those at the bottom were nothing. They were serfs. They were plebeians. They were slaves of the government. All right, now, under people's law, it was inverted. All the power was in the base. Very little at the top. Now, keep that in mind. That's a visual that we don't want to forget. So, on the national, state, municipal, family, or individual level, look at this. Where does the authority accumulate in the forms of government on these levels? Where does the government want the authority to be today? So we're gravitating back to ruler's law. You know, they want a law because you will hear, one of the ways that you can tell a liberal is that, you know, there ought to be a law. You know, there ought to be a law against that. Man, they just ought to be a law. They want the government to fix everything with the passage of another law. And so what the individual responsibility is just being taken out of the way. You know, the government tell you what to do. Well, notice that the power base under each system is completely opposite. And if you compare the relationship between the individual and the rest of society under each system, you start to get the idea of why people begin to revolt under this ruler's law. Under tyranny, all the power is concentrated in one person or government. Under people's law, it's concentrated in the people. Now, under our Constitution, power flows from the people. In other words, our Constitution is an agreement from us. We wrote it. I'm talking about the people, the populace. What is the first line of the Constitution? There you go. We, the people, are going to tell you how much government you can afflict us with. This is what you will do. The government did not write the Constitution. We did. All right? Now, the government ought to be scared to death of people. But I'm afraid it's not. Now, let me show you something interesting here. Look at the structure of Israel. At the top, there was Moses, and then Joshua and Aaron. And then they had a council of 70, and they had elected representatives. And then it broke down to 600 groups of 1,000 families, and 6,000 groups of 100 families, and 12,000 groups of 50 families, 60,000 groups of 10 families, more than 600,000 people, which was more than 3 million people with the power to do what? Govern themselves. Moses was not the dictator. He was God's leader, but they had this designed like this, and this is exactly what our founders looked at and said, we like that. We're going to do that. We're going to build that into our Constitution, and that's exactly what they did. So, here are the three scales, ruler's law, no law, and people's law, which was Anglo-Saxon law. Under people's law, the amount of government control is determined directly by the consent of the government. Where have we lost it? We've been convinced, we were talking about this earlier, by media, by popular figures, that the government controls everything. And all we need to do is be subservient little serfs and do what we're told. We have surrendered our freedoms, folks. We've just laid down and let them do whatever they want to do, and we've lost our grip on our constitutional responsibilities. So, the founders wanted the citizens to be free of excessive and oppressive government control. All right. It was not unanimous, by the way. 55 delegates came. All of them stayed. My word, they had to get crops in. They had to get back and stay there, you know. They had that stuff to do. By September the 17th, only 39 of them remained, and 3 of them refused to sign. 2 Corinthians 3:17, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. The Americans wanted freedom from the British Crown. And the only way to do that was to sever the ties to that government and establish a new government. And that's exactly what they did. Now, where did they get this stuff? This idea of governing themselves? Well, honestly, if you read back in history, the kings of Europe thought we were stupid. They really thought we were too ignorant to pull this off. You ever heard the term divine right of kings? That God has given me the crown and he'll give my son the crown and then his son. This is the way Europe had functioned like this forever. And they thought that you got wisdom to govern by bloodline. The English they still got a trace of that today, even though the Queen doesn't do spit. You know, she is kin to the right people. Right? And that's where this thing comes from. Well, we can thank Thomas Jefferson for introducing the precepts of people's law to the Constitutional Convention. Yay for Thomas Jefferson. I don't agree with everything Jefferson did, but I do agree with this, and I appreciate what he did here. Now, there's an amazing connection. The founders read the law of Moses, and they read people's law, and they discovered some incredible similarities. Thomas Hooker wrote the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut based on Deuteronomy chapter 1. And the reason that's important is it was the first written constitution in modern history. It was adopted in 1639. Now, the founders discovered the key to prosperity and freedom was in the Bible. Shock. That it is the book of freedom that it claims to be. And it definitely is. Well, that sound familiar? Here were some principal points of people's law. Commonwealth, all decisions and selection of leaders had to be with the consent of the governor. By the way, California, back a few years ago, passed a resolution that marriage was between a man and a woman. There was a minority of people that didn't like that. And they overturned the rule and the vote of a majority of Californians by dictate. Where does that come from? That's certainly not a constitutional provision, but that's exactly how this thing works. All right? The laws by which they were governed were considered natural laws given by God. In other words, who says it's wrong to kill? God does. That's a natural law, right? And so power was dispersed among the people and never allowed to concentrate in one person or one party. All right. Primary responsibility for resolving problems rested, first of all, with the individual, then the family, then the tribe or the community, then the region, and finally the nation. The nation was the last resort. You see a biblical pattern here. You know, these concentric circles just spread out, and that was the way that they were handled. They were organized into small, manageable groups where every adult had a voice and a vote. Units of 10 families selected a leader, 50 families selected a leader, 100 families, and 1,000 families. We're talking about a representative government. Now, where did our guys get all these ideas? I'm telling you, they got them right out of the Bible. This is how God told Israel to structure their government, and it worked. The rights of the individual were considered unalienable. That means you can't be divorced from them. God gave them to you. The government can't take them away. And they could not be revoked without risking the wrath of divine justice as well as civil retribution by the people of judges. Our government today doesn't give a rip about retribution by God. But I'm saying they do what they want to do. And they're putting everybody at risk as a result of this. Then number 8, a system of justice based on severe punishment and complete reparation to the wrong person. In other words, the person who committed the crime is not the victim. And that's what we're seeing. You know, I'm sure that you heard back a year ago, a member of our administration said, you know what ISIS terrorists need? A job. That's their problem. They don't have good work. And that's why they're mad and blowing everything up, but they need a job. Exactly, ma'am. I share your, what? You know, what are you even thinking? It was a lady that was in the, and I was just like, oh my word, no wonder. You know, we've got some problems here. Anglo-Saxons considered 4 crimes to be against the whole people. In other words, to be against the whole nation. What were they? Here they were. Number one, treason. You didn't do that. You did that, they shot you. All right? Bergdahl would not have even lived. If you know who Bergdahl is, I'm talking about. The Supreme Court has said, oh, no, crime. Well, that's a hateful thing to say. That is a constitutionally, well, it's really not. But that's what we've got. So, people's law was unwritten because the Anglo-Saxons believed these to be universal laws. If you've got to write these things down, should not a man know to keep his word? Back in the day when you shook somebody's hand, y'all all remember these days, don't you? That is your contract. Your name and your handshake, that's all you needed. Well, the things have changed considerably. Well, God has given these certain unalienable rights. Among these, this is not all of them, but among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, getting into the minefield of abortion. Is it a constitutionally protected thing that a woman can have an abortion? Well, God gave certain unalienable rights. Well, look at the first one. Does everybody deserve a lifetime? Absolutely. And the pursuit of happiness. The government can't guarantee a house or a car, but you can pursue it, chase it hard as you want. Well, if I don't get it, oh well. Try again. Load up, try again. God gave these and other rights so the government cannot take them away. They are constitutionally guaranteed. And this is what is so cotton-picking fabulous about our Constitution. This stuff's in writing. The Bill of Rights is a written document. They left a paper trail. It's absolutely fabulous. Now, we've got some shifting sands under us because what's happening, let me give you a personal theory, all right? I think I can back this up, but I'm not going to take time to do it now. There are many people in the culture that want to disconnect you from your belief in God and your dependence on God. Well, you're going to have to depend on somebody. You're going to have to believe in something. What do they want you to believe in? Who's going to provide? Exactly. Who's going to provide your needs? Who's going to take care of you? Well, we believe God. Oh, no, not God. Okay, government. Yes. There is a diabolical idea behind liberalism, and it is this: to divorce you from your dependence on God and put your dependence on them. This is exactly where we're headed. And so, if government becomes the provider of all of your rights and privileges, they can revoke them at will. America dies when we disconnect ourselves from the God of heaven. Now, I want to finish up and wrap this thing up. This is just an incredible thing. In 1887, Alexander Tyler was a Scottish history professor at the University of Edinburgh. And he had this to say about the Athenian Republic 2,000 years earlier. Now, this is in 1887 that this guy says this. A democracy is always temporary in nature. It simply cannot exist as a permanent form of government. A democracy will continue to exist up until the time that voters discover that they can vote themselves generous gifts from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority will always vote for the candidates who promise the most benefits from that treasury, with the result that every democracy will finally collapse over a loose fiscal policy, which is always followed by a dictatorship. Why are the millennials so high on Bernie Sanders? Free college. Free college, that don't cost you anything. And so that's why that's basically the base of people that are supporting Sanders, is the government's going to take care of it. Now, the average age of the world's great civilizations is about 200 years. During those 200 years, nations always progress through a cycle. There's a systematic pattern. They go from bondage, and as we go through these, I want you to just kind of skate through American history here, all right? Bondage to spiritual faith. Spiritual faith to great courage. Courage to liberty. That's what it took to get our freedom. Liberty to abundance. By 1905, we were the richest industrial nation on earth. Abundance to complacency. No, we're used to it. It'll always be there. Complacency to apathy. I don't care if I have it or not now. Apathy to dependence. Dependence right back to bondage. It happened 7 times in the book of Judges to Israel. 7 times. Exactly this pattern. Now, question, where do you think we are?
Second to the bottom.
I think we're at the apathy to dependence. You're exactly right. People just don't want work. All they want is their check. That's all they care about. Take care of me. I will surrender my freedom if you will guarantee me security. That's exactly where we are. So, the goal of any government is freedom. But the question is, whose freedom? Yours or theirs? Posterity. You will never know how much it has cost my generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you will make good use of it. John Quincy Adams. We have a fabulous heritage given us, and we're throwing it away. My grandkids will never know the America I grew up in. Your grandkids, your great-grandkids, they will never know the America that you grew up in. And that breaks my heart. You know, these kids are going to grow up thinking that the government is the mother goose that provides everything for everybody, that costs you anything. Well, I'm opposed to that, and I think probably you are too. I want to encourage you. Don't give up. I know we live in it's a depressing time in American cultural history. But keep in mind that this is not accidental. This is not random. Our God has His hands on the steering wheel of this nation. And it's people like you. It's not people like congressmen. It's people like you that have historically made the difference in the direction of this country. Many of you here are retired. You've worked your 45 or 50 years, whatever it was, and you've earned the right to sit down and sleep as late as you want to, which you probably don't do. You get up and probably still work. But I want to thank you, because it's people just like you that have built layer upon layer of integrity, character, and it's folks like you that built this nation to what it is today. I want to thank you for that. It's men and women like you who serve overseas and in our armed forces that your show of strength kept our enemies at bay. And I want to thank you for that. Maybe you never fired a shot in the military. I don't know. But the fact that you were in uniform was an intimidating thing to people that wanted to kill us. And so thank you for that. God bless you, and I pray that your families will just be blessed and that you have good health. And thank you, Pastor, for inviting me to come back up here. I pray God's greatest blessings on the church here. And let me encourage you to do one thing. There's some books back on the back, and I ran out last time I was here. It's a book by Cleon Skousen called The 5,000 Year League's best book on this subject that I've ever read. And I have bought these by the hundreds and distributed these things. They're $20. Get a copy of that book. Read that book. And when you're through with it, give it to your kids and let them read it. It's second to none for this particular kind of study. So again, thank you so much. God bless you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Pastor.
Okay, we can give you another round of applause. I don't want to add anything to or take anything away from what he said. I thought of 2 particular verses of Scripture, and one comes from Galatians 5:18. It says, "He that's led by the Spirit is not under the law." And our home folks know that. We talk about that a lot when it's associated with grace, and just the idea that the Holy Spirit does not lead you to do things that are against the law. The Holy Spirit's not going to lead you to murder. He's not going to lead you to adultery. He's not going to lead you into any of those things. So that was one of the things that came to my mind. And we've actually been studying. We're going through Exodus right now on Wednesday nights, and so not one particular verse of scripture, but we're at this place. If you remember, those of you who were here, I guess it'd be 2 Wednesday nights ago, we actually talked about Exodus, or talked about Moses establishing this government, and some were over 1,000, some were over their hundreds, some over their 50s, and just putting it into these words and seeing different understanding of where this came from foundationally for our country. I don't think that we're doomed. I really don't. I have to believe that we're still the greatest nation in history. I still think that some of the greatest innovations are coming out of this country. I still think that there are plenty more that will come. There are some brilliant minds that are alive today. There's people that are coming up with concepts in this country that I still am amazed. I'm amazed that my wife can be at work, call me on the phone, and I can see her talking on my phone. That stuff was invented in this country. That's amazing. You should be amazed by that. So don't give up hope. The greatest days are still ahead. And I say that on the heels of us sitting here a few minutes ago, mumbling and grumbling about how terrible things are. But the bottom line of it is there's little folks around us that need what we have. They need our hope. They need our American dream. And so encourage them to go after that stuff. Amen? So how about we do this? I think a lot. I'm looking around. I don't see any new faces, particularly from last time. If you have some questions, I'm sure Jim will be around to just grab his hand or whatever instead of just us doing them hopefully. Get the books. I encourage you to do that. And thanks for being here. And if we decide to do it again, invite some more folks, right? Because the more the word gets out, the better. And I appreciate you being here. And I ask the Lord to bless you. Let me close with a word of prayer. And make sure you come up and shake his hand. That means you appreciate it. Lord God, we thank you so much again for just being in this place at this time. That this country was founded on these principles, this foundation, Lord. So we ask that you would, again, just change us, turn our hearts to a place where we can rebuild and regain the momentum of freedom, liberty. Lord, help us to begin to govern ourselves. Help us to live under that standard that he that is led by the Spirit is not under the law. Help us to begin to see what our founders wanted us to have, liberty and freedom. And Lord, we just thank you for the liberty and freedom that comes in Christ. In his name we pray.